I was reminded of another story, and in my mind, at least, I think it demonstrates the value of trust. And that's the story when you were the commander, air group landing signal officer aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln, and had to help Mark Baden land the A-6 with a
Yep.
partial ejection. That's another incredible story. I was wondering if you would share that with the listeners.
Yeah. And then we'll talk about why the trust part is there too. So I was the senior landing signal officer on USS Abraham Lincoln as part of Carrier Air Wing 11. And what that means is there's a team of landing signal officers that are assigned to the ship, to the air wing. There are 2 per squadron. And what you do is you stand on the back of the carrier, back on the left-hand side, aft, and your job is to help pilots get aboard when the thing they're looking at on the carrier is not valid. So usually the landing aids on a carrier are valid when the ship is just kind of steaming straight. When it starts to pitch or starts to move around, because it's happening so fast, you often can't tell that the motion is not you, but it's the ship. And so you'll use radio calls as a landing signal officer to tell somebody like, hey, you look like you're high, but you're not. The deck is down. It's going to come back up. Stay right where you are, when normally a pilot would correct the high. So it might be something like, deck's down, hold what you got. Deck's up, you're a little low, a little power, something like that. So you're adding to the pilot's information while they're flying stick and throttle to get aboard, meatball lineup, angle attack to get aboard. Since I was the senior landing signal officer on the ship, you are the senior landing signal officer ship of the CAG LSO is charged with the safe landing of all aircraft aboard the carrier in all conditions, no matter what happens. You're the person that they turn to. And so this particular instance, Mark Baden, the pilot, Keith Gallagher, the bombardier navigator, and A-6 had a malfunction above Abraham Lincoln in July of 1991, where as Mark did a negative G maneuver to free up a refueling valve that had frozen in the refueling store because they were the overhead tanker, that hard negative G to try to get the ice off the valve, it actually broke Keith Gallagher's seat where it kind of connected to the ejection pole, allowed the seat to ride up 18 inches, which fired the drogue gun in the parachute on the top of the ejection seat. That's a shotgun shell. It blew the canopy out, took the drogue chute out, took the main chute out about halfway, and then it wrapped around the tail after it had pulled Keith Gallagher up to about his waist out of the airplane. And so I'm on the ship. We just got done with a recovery, and we hear on the general announcing system, emergency pull forward, CAG paddles to the platform, which means go run back to the platform, get all the airplanes out of the way. Something has happened. We require an immediate landing. And so the ship is in a huge turn because it had turned out of the wind. And in naval aviation, in order to land aircraft on the ship, you have to have a headwind. Because that keeps you predictable, and usually the winds are not favorable to your course, so the ship will turn out of the recovery headwind for aircraft operations in between launches and recoveries, and will head down range to wherever it is we're going. In this particular case, we had to turn back into the wind for this A-6 with a guy stuck halfway out the top. And so I meet the air bosun at the 4-wire, and he says, we have a partial ejection in an A-6. And I think, okay, that means the canopy's gone, the bombardier navigator is gone, and the pilot's flying the airplane by himself in a convertible, and he probably can't hear. That's what I think about right then. And then the air bosun talks on his walkie-talkie thing, puts the thing back up and says, the BN's still in the cockpit. The BN's still with the airplane. His feet are in the cockpit. And I literally thought that there's a guy hanging out of the airplane bouncing on it, like literally all the way outside with just like his lower legs in the cockpit. I'm like, what? And I go flying over to the platform, pick up the handset, pick up the pickle, which is what you give the visual signals on the meatball, which is the left landing aid on the ship, port side of the landing area. And the ship's in a huge turn, and I'm facing back this way. So the ship is turning away from this A-6, which I can see approaching the back of the airplane from about 1.5 miles away, maybe 2 miles away. And he's angling over to catch the winds. And so what we have to do is we have to get the ship into the wind, steady it out because we don't do well landing in turns. We've got to get the airplane on glide slope, get him on lineup, and stop him so we can get Keith out of the airplane. I mean, that's the outcome that we want. And so I'm watching the A-6 come over. I'm seeing the ship in a turn. I realize here that I have to get the winds just right because we have a crosswind limit. There's a certain headwind you need and a crosswind limit. You can't have more than a certain amount of crosswind. And what I started doing was looking at the flags up on the island, the signal flags that are flapping up there. And I'm starting to approximate where the flags are with where the turn is, with where the A-6 is, because we have to get him landed the first time. Because I don't know if Keith's dead, but more time in the air is not going to be good for him. So we got to land him. And so what I did, which is unique, is I started talking to Mark about his airplane and how he was flying it and what I needed him to do. But I also started telling the captain to steady up the ship. So I'm telling the captain of the ship, who is vastly senior to me, that he needs to stop turning so I can land the airplane. It was my role as the landing signal officer to get the conditions right to land the jet. And it was my judgment. And so usually what happens is the captain directs his officer of the deck to turn the ship into the wind. They have gauges that show crosswind and headwind. They get it right. And then paddles is slang for LSOs. Paddles lands the airplane. In this case, I'm doing all of that. And all I'm doing is looking at the flags, approximating where they are, assuming I have about enough headwind, about as much crossing as I can from the limit and looking at the A6. So I just started telling the captain. And if you go on the web, actually, if you do A6 partial ejection, there's a neat story that Keith wrote about his experience. And there are a couple of audio clips of stuff. And one of them is me talking. And so I'm talking to Mark about his airplane. I'm talking to the captain about the winds. And I say, hey, Captain, I'll take the winds. And about the third time I said it, he just a big God voice on the radio, steadying up. And so then the ship kind of steadies up, and you can still see the wake is turning a little bit when Mark comes across the ramp. And he landed successfully. I yelled attitude a whole bunch of times, which is pull back on the stick, because his hook literally skipped 3 of the 4 wires and grabbed the last wire on the roll. The trust factor comes in because I trusted Mark to have the airplane in the correct configuration to land the jet. Now I can see his flaps, I can see his landing gear, I can see his hook, but I don't know whether he has, he's dumped fuel down to his landing weight. But I trusted that he was ready to go. The captain trusted me to tell him where to put the ship. And I'm a lieutenant commander. I'm the CAG LSO. I have displayed to him that I can recover airplanes. I know what I'm talking about. I know what I'm doing. So he trusts me to do that. If I had not gotten that right, and if actually the winds were bad and Mark had ended up crashing into the ramp, that would have been the captain's fault. And so he literally trusted me with his career when he said, steadying up. And I told him, I've got this airplane. And so there was this entire circle of trust to get that airplane aboard safely. Keith ended up living. He is married a fiance. They have 2 daughters. That life would not have existed had we not captured that airplane on the first time.